Hi, I'm Pastor Tay of the Titus 2 Ministry and PastorTay.com. Welcome to Espresso. It's an interactive Bible study that is like Espresso, strong and smooth. Enjoy the taste.
Hey everybody, this is Don, or Dr. Don. Welcome to Titus 2 Community's special marriage support group. This is Talk Live Tuesday that we have every Tuesday night at 6 p.m. West Coast or Pacific Standard Time and 9 p.m. on the East Coast. If you saw the preview, I was sideways, and I was doing that because I actually thought you'd be lying down when you were watching me, but I was told I need to stand up and you need to be sitting up. So anyway, tonight we welcome you to those of you who are tuning in again or for the first time. And we also want to give a hello and a welcome to those of you who are watching by YouTube or in the Special Units tab, which is on the left. If you're looking at your computer, it's on the left, or is that the left? That way. Otherwise, if you're watching on a phone or looking at it on the phone, it's up above, and that I got right. I'm not sideways, am I? Am I sideways? Am I okay? Can you tell? My daughter Kendra's here to help me out. So, I'm a team member with Titus 2 Community. I've been a pastoral and a biblical counselor for a little over 20 years. And I've had experience in various churches as a pastor and been doing a variety of things. But right now my concentration is, along with my wife, raising our 18-month-old child. I call him son. He's actually our grandson. But that's a heavy-duty thing. The second thing that I do is I am a parenting coach, and I try to help parents give support to them as they have a lot of questions and help them primarily come to an understanding with a different paradigm of parenting other than what we so commonly know. Anyway, that's enough about me, and I'm glad you are here. What we do here, as you may well know, unless you're here for the first time, what we do is we rotate every 4 different sessions or weeks, 4 Tuesdays, and the one Tuesday is on communication. That's tonight. The next Tuesday is on conflict. The next Tuesday is about in-laws, how to address, deal with, support, encourage, whatever is needed with regard to in-laws. And then finally about marital sex. And so those are the 4 things that we rotate through, and we do it again and again. And now we're back to communication. The last time I taught on communication had to do with listening, listening as a high-value skill and an important skill. But tonight, what we're going to see and what you'll look at, and by the way, if you want complete notes, you can go to relevate.org and look in the communication blog posts area, and you can find the notes there. Or you can scroll down and look. Earlier today I posted the questions that we're going to be covering this evening, the 7 different questions, because this evening we're looking at 7 excellent listening skills for successful communication. And one of the things that is really at the heart of conflict in between husband and wife, from spouse to spouse, has to do with communication or the lack thereof. Miscommunication, poor understanding, poor listening skills, sloppy talking, or whatever it might be. But one of the key areas in working together, as I have counseled over the years with couples, is there's a tendency not to really hear what each one is saying when they're in conflict. And that's what we're going to address tonight, is some of the biblical aspects, 7 biblical things to look at, as well as very practical things that we need to look at when it comes to listening, how to listen, and how to listen well. All right, you ready? Okay, this is a self-exam, and what you're going to do, I hope, is score yourself on these 7 different areas. So as I ask the question, give yourself a 5, meaning I always do this, a 4, I frequently do this, a 3, I sometimes do this, 2, I infrequently do this, and 1, I never do this. Okay? And we'll see at the end how you score and how you do. And by the way, this is an open book quiz, so You just have to be honest. All right? So, tonight, again, 7 excellent listening skills for successful communication. The first skill that we have to have as Christians who are interested in understanding a biblical way of communicating is a desire to please God. I desire to please God in my communication with my spouse. I desire to please God in my communication with my spouse. See, Kendra, you're not the only one. I can be tongue-tied and tongue-twisted sometimes and misuse some words. Anyway, is that true for you? Is that always true, never true, or sometimes true? Now, admittedly, none of us can please God all the time because we're this side of heaven. However, is it our intent when we dialogue with our spouse, especially when we are trying to work together and deal with one another in communication, do we have at the forefront of our mind a desire to honor and please God? Now, we can see this in 1 Corinthians chapter 10:31, where it says, do all things for the glory of God. Meaning, for his radiant and heavy, wonderful beauty that he has, do I reflect God's glory, and do I give glory to God when I talk to my wife, or as a wife when I talk to my husband? And that's the question. So what would you do? How would you score yourself, and how do you work that with your wife? The second skill that is essential, so we've already talked about the most important skill, but the second skill that is very essential is I am concerned about my spouse enough to be interested in what he or she says. Am I interested enough to be concerned about what he or she says? Now, you might think, well, that's a given. But the reality is, and statistically, most people don't. They don't focus in, and they don't understand, and they don't listen intently enough to really understand what is being said. There are many passages that address this, like in Ephesians chapter 4 or Philippians 2, verse 3, and so forth. So the way to do that is to show an interest in your partner. Do you show an interest in your partner? Do you listen across time? In other words, do you remember what was said the last time you talked about the issue or the point? Or did you quickly forget about it? If it's an important thing, in a matter that you're dialoguing, you want to remember what was said before so that you can pick up where you left off and talk about it and exercise wisdom in that issue. So you listen across time. And then you really need to make, in this case, you really need to make it easy for your spouse to talk. And the way you do that is you use tracking skills. For example, I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but when it comes to communicating with other people, if you really enjoy being with that person and you're listening to them, you tend to mimic what they do. And this is a self-conscious thing that all people normally do. So if you're sitting at the coffee shop and you're talking to a very good friend of yours, and your friend is across from you, and they've got this cup of coffee, and they pick it up, and you end up picking it up, or they have their hand on their face or leaning, you tend to do that, or in other words, you mirror the very behaviors and the things that they do, and sometimes your inflection and your voice somewhat replicates the other person in a way that attracts them. Using good eye contact, obviously, not interrupting, sometimes leaning forward and leaning in towards them to show that you have an interest and you want to know more. Using prompting phrases such as go ahead, and then, or I hear you, I understand. And don't be the proverbial listener. For example, you always saw, I used to always watch these years and years and years ago, the 1950s, 1960s, Father Knows Best shows, Leave It to Beaver, where the dad comes home and he sits down, he pulls out his newspaper and he's sitting there and he's covering his face, and his wife begins to talk to him. Lucille Ball show, they always did this. So Ricky would be sitting there reading the newspaper, and Lucy'd be talking and talking and talking, and he'd be behind the paper, not really paying attention, but every now and then he's going, mm-hmm, uh-huh, yes, dear, mm-hmm. Well, that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is putting those distractions aside and being attentive and showing an interest in what he or she says. So how'd you do? Anybody scoring? Anybody want to share? Do you share? All right, number three skill. I am a ready and disciplined listener. I am a ready and disciplined listener. As we touched upon the last time when we talked about listening as a high value skill, the reality is, and as studies have shown, most people aren't disciplined enough to really listen. We have lost that capability to do that. Now, back in the old days, you would want to listen because maybe there's danger lurking in the woods, or perhaps your life is threatened, or you're always watching out for something. So listening was, people were more in tune to their environment and to things that are going on. However, nowadays we are so distracted that we don't tend to really listen or pay attention. And we're not a ready or willing or disciplined listener. And so it's very important to be a disciplined listener. Now, what does that mean? Well, James tells us, chapter 1, verse 19, encourages us, says, "So then, my beloved brethren, let everyone be swift to hear or to listen, slow to speak, and slow to wrath." You catch that? Swift to hear, ready to hear. So what this means is that most or all the time, I stop what I'm doing and I pay attention to my spouse. Now, again, I'm not talking about casual dialogue and discussion, where you're talking about the weather or some incidental thing. What I'm talking about is when you sit down and you're having a meaningful, a vital, a very important dialogue and discussion with each other. And so what you want to do is focus in and pay attention to your spouse. To be a disciplined listener means you concentrate, you think. And maybe you're too tired to do that. If that's the case, take a break. Pick it up another time. Don't ignore it, but just say, I'm too tired to think about it right now, which is legitimate because oftentimes we are exhausted or we are tired and our brains have been overused. It could also mean that you attend to what your spouse is feeling. You pick up on it. Now, the stereotypical thing that we often see in TV and movies, especially nowadays with men, is that they're clueless when it comes to observing how people are with their body language. If the guy is looking at his wife and she's kind of giving a sigh, or she's rolling her eyes, or she's looking away, or she has some kind of expression that indicates that she's frustrated or upset or isn't really listening. If the guy is clueless to that, that gives her all the more ammunition not to listen. So what you need to do in this skill is to really attend to body language, but also to what the spouse is feeling. And many times that comes out in their words. They might say it loudly. Sometimes they say it nonchalantly, but they really are demonstrating they're upset or angry or sad or whatever the emotion might be. So concentrate and look for those things. Be good at that. And then put away things that can distract me, can distract you from listening. If you have a dog, a cat, an elephant, if you have the TV on, if you have or the radio blaring, whatever it is that could distract the conversation, turn it off, put it away, make it quiet enough where you can communicate effectively and apply the skill. Now, the opposite way to do this, of course, is to consistently be slow or unwilling to listen. You're present there. You're sitting in front of your spouse, but you're not tuned in, you're not listening, you're daydreaming, or your mind is wandering, or you intentionally, in order to get back at your husband or wife, you intentionally just cut her off or cut him off and don't want to have anything to do with them in the discussion. Don't do that. Don't do that. That's not godly. That's not biblical. That's not caring. That's not loving. And to be attentive is to be a good servant to your spouse. Allowing distractions to interfere, like the phone and the computer. Turn your phone off. I like the idea, or shut it off so you can't hear. You put it out of the way. Put down the book. Stop the games, or whatever it is that's distracting, and focus in on your spouse to talk. Any thoughts or comments yet on that? Any questions? I see a number of people have shown up. Are you still there? Are you listening? All right, if you can think of something, let me know. All right, so what to do? Like I said, 1, put away distractions. Put away distractions. Be intentional about putting away distractions. Do that for yourself and for your spouse. Make sure that you can have that time, whether it's 10 minutes, an hour, however much time you dedicate to that, and put it away so that it's just the two of you, and nothing is going to get in the way or interfere. Look at your spouse who's speaking. Read the lips. Watch the eyes. Observe the expression. Look face to face. Don't look away. Don't. That doesn't mean you have to stare in their eyes constantly. Obviously, that's unnatural as well. But look at the speaker, and don't rush the conversation or talk too much. I know in just observing couples, I'm a people observer. That's my favorite thing to do when I'm at the airport or some other place, is to watch people. But what you do in this situation is you don't want to rush the conversation. And I've seen this happen. Maybe you've done it. Maybe you've experienced where the you or the spouse, is impatient. This often happens when people are bottom line people. Just bottom line. Let's get to the point. Stop going on and on and on. It's kind of typical for men who are in fields like engineering or as a scientist or so forth to do that. They just want the bottom line, and they often marry a woman who thinks about all kinds of things, and so she brings in all the dynamics and gives all the details, and the guy's getting impatient, and so he's trying to rush her up. Well, don't do that. Just let her talk, and then you have your occasion, you have your opportunity to talk. Another important thing is allow for silence. Silence is okay. Silence is a good thing. So if there's a pause, don't be intimidated by that. Some people are. Don't fear silence. Just take the time. Maybe you or your spouse are trying to collect their thoughts, or trying to consider what's been said, or if there is anything left to say. And, they're just silent. That's okay. That's all right. And then concentrate. Really concentrate on what's being said. And like I said earlier, if you're having a hard time concentrating in the discussion or dialogue, like if all of a sudden you decide you're going to talk at 11:30 at night and you're both morning people, that's not very wise, and you don't have the bandwidth, and you don't have the strength or the mental power to be able to do that, then for crying out loud, stop the talk, go to sleep, get the rest, or come back. All right.
Laura has a question.
What's Laura's question?
Do men and women have similar needs when it comes to being heard or valued by their partners?
Yes. That was easy. Do you have any other? Do you want to adumbrate on that or explain that anymore, Laura? Now, I recently read a book about. Hey, Stacy.
From Japan.
Also, Osaka, Japan. Wonderful. Good to have you. Yes, men and women have similar needs when it comes to being heard. And some people bring out the fact that women want to be valued and loved, and men, though love is important, want to be valued and respected. And so You have to take that into consideration. I started to say, I read a book recently about men's brains and the brains of men and boys. And the reality is the brains that they've studied over the past 50 to 75 years of men and women are absolutely different. Now, I don't mean that that men have Martian brains and women have brains because they're from Venus, as the popular book used to say. What I'm saying is that we are wired differently. And so we hear differently, we process things a little differently, we take in things, we recognize, we think about things. Men can have tunnel vision and they're thinking only in this direction, and a woman thinks this way, and then she's here, and she pulls in and she brings it all in and finally brings it all together. And that's okay. That's who we are, and that's what we're made to be like. So, any other questions? Any other thoughts? So what do you do? What do you do for that? Anything else? Put away distractions and so forth. Anything else on your mind? Yeah, I think it was Michael Gurian's book, I believe. All right. Fourth thing, number 4. Here's the question. Get ready to rate yourself. 5, 4, 3, 2, or 1. Which is it? I think before I speak. Do you think before you speak? Proverbs 15:28 says, "It's the heart of the righteous that ponders how to answer, but the mouth of the wicked pours out evil things." The wise person is one who contemplates and thinks about what he's going to say or what she's going to present. Proverbs 15:28. The other one is Proverbs 29:29, which says, "Do you see a man who's hasty in his words?" Implying, he's wanting to talk too much and talk before thinking about it. It says, "There is more hope than for a fool than for him." So what does that mean? I think before I speak. Well, consider what is being said and accept it at face value. Don't do the interpretation thing. Unless your wife is from Yugoslavia and you happen to be Chinese, then you want to interpret, obviously. But I'm talking about if you have good, decent language skills and you're able to communicate in the same language, then what you do is you really want to think about what is said and accept it at face value. And if you're curious about it, then explore it a little more. Talk about it, flesh it out. What do you mean? What do you think? How do you mean by that? It also means you grasp what your spouse is saying, and then you formulate your answer. Now, again, interesting studies have been done about how people have a tendency to think about what they're going to say while the other person's talking, rather than thinking about what that person's saying and then pausing and reflecting and giving an answer. Do you see the difference? You're sitting there and someone's talking to you and you're thinking about something. And some people are so astute at this that they tend to say something that's so irrelevant. Their mind has wandered and they're off into the wild blue, and it has nothing to do with the price of tea in China or anywhere else for that matter. So you don't want to do that. What you want to do is you think about what your spouse is saying and then formulate a response in your mind. Then think of the repercussions of what you're going to say before saying it. Think of the repercussions. Now this is important because saying the right thing at the wrong time can really sabotage the discussion. It can ruin it. It can backfire. It can make a mess of your dialogue and communication together. And so even though it's the right thing but said at the wrong time, that's not good. So you got to think about it. The other thing is you can say the wrong thing at the right time, and that can hurt the relationship. I recall years ago when we were in a Bible study, and one of the men there was a scientist. He's a brilliant man, but he was the proverbial stereotypical scientist when it came to relationships. And he liked philosophy, and he thought about things and thought very deeply and thoroughly about that, which is good. But we were talking about the glory of God and about beauty in this Bible study. And the guy, the klutz that he was, his wife was sitting next to her, and he says, "I don't believe in beauty." And she looked at him, and she was stunned, and then she slapped him on his leg and called out his name, and she was pretty upset about that. He said, "Well, he didn't know how to get out of that one." So he said, we were talking about the beauty, so he was in the right context, but he said the wrong thing. So what you want to make sure you do is you think before you speak, and you don't say the wrong thing at the right time. Now, what's the opposite of doing that? Well, thinking about more what you want to say than about listening to what the other person is talking about. There you are formulating ideas and concepts and so forth. If you feel intimidated, take notes, jot down some things. And if you have to, say, let me think about this. Let's come back and talk about it later. But what you want to think about is not about what you're thinking about, but rather what they're telling you. Speaking without giving your response or much thought is also not a good thing. What you want to do is you grasp what your spouse is saying and then formulate the response, and then think of the repercussions. Think of the repercussions, and don't do the opposite, like speaking without giving your response much thought, which, by the way, oh, hey, Rhonda, Adam, good to see you guys. So welcome to our show. I'm glad you tuned in. We're talking about number 4, I think, before I speak. Doing the opposite, speaking without giving your response much thought, or automatically assuming things and interpreting what is being said. What we have to be careful doing is give consideration and process. It's okay to pause. It's okay to take a few minutes to think through what you're going to say, or to process what has just been said. You don't have to rush it. And if you're going to rush it, then it really isn't of that great a value to sit down and talk at that time. Come back and talk about it later. So what can you do? How do you get into a habit where you think before you speak? Well, use the acronym and try to remember the acronym HEAR. 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 First one, H. Is it helpful? Is it helpful? Is what I'm going to say helpful? Now, obviously, when you're in a dialogue, you're not going to pull out note cards and think, wait a minute, this is going to take time, it's going to take practice, you're going to have to exercise it and work through it, but you begin to learn the habit of figuring out, is what I'm going to say helpful for our discussion here? The second thing is, for the E, is it educational? Is it informative? Can I inform the subject more? Can I bring to light some things that maybe had not been discussed before, or talked about, or considered? Is it informative or educational? The A is for, is it appropriate? Is it appropriate? In the heat of the moment, when you're upset and angry, we often, sometimes we just have this problem with vomiting our emotions through our words. And that can be very harmful and hurtful. So rather than doing that, stop and think, is what I'm going to say appropriate? Should I really say it? Is it appropriate for this talk? Is it appropriate for now? Yeah, I like that, Stacy. Did I understand you correctly? That's an excellent point to bring up. And then fourth, the R is it relevant? Is it relevant? Your wife is telling you about something serious, that happened, and she was, with a friend who got injured or hurt, and she's giving the story, and you're listening to it, and all of a sudden you're talking about fishing, going fishing, or you're going to go on a vacation or something like that. No, that's not relevant. And so if it's not relevant at that time, put it aside, put it away, come back later. And if what is said is unclear, ask good questions. Ask good questions. Repeat back, and we'll talk about this in a minute, repeat back what they said or ask questions about it. All right. How are we doing? Any thoughts and questions? Anybody wanting to reveal their scores yet? Okay, number 5. I wait until the other person has finished talking before answering. Very similar to the previous points. But I wait until the other person's finished before I start talking. Proverbs 18, verse 13 says, if one gives an answer before he hears it, it is foolishness and shame. Ouch. The Bible has something to say as wise and as practical as that. Listen first. Don't give an answer. Proverbs 18, verse 17. The one who states his case first seems right until someone else comes along and examines him. Yeah. So you want to make sure that you wait till the other person is finished talking before answering. So what does this mean? Well, be aware of the cues for when your spouse is finished talking. Now, I have met people and even counseled couples where one or the other is motor mouth. They talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. And motor, blah, 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 yeah. And it's a live stream of one word. There are no exclamation marks, no periods, no commas or anything. They just keep going and going and going and going. And the spouse has no idea or no clue when to pitch in and say something. Well, you got to have some kind of verbal or visual cues to let the other person know that you want to talk. And raise your hand, tap them on the shoulder, interject, may I say something, or something like that. Okay, question.
Is it fair during a tough discussion to explain how hard you are working to be attentive and connect with the other person?
Yes, it is quite fair. And if your spouse doesn't understand that, then that's a discussion to have. But it is fair to explain how hard it is for you to really understand it, maybe the nature of the problem, or his or her perception or perspective, whatever it might be. It really is of value to say, I really am trying hard to get what you're saying. And I'm listening, but it's not coming to me yet. And maybe at that point, you could begin to ask some questions so as to get some light. Now, this assumes you're not overly tired and you're having a hard time concentrating. But oftentimes we find ourselves in a dialogue and discussion where the one is talking this way and the other's talking that way. And you're kind of talking over or under each other and you're missing the point. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I don't have time to deal with it now. But it's very important to say, this is hard to get. This is hard for me to understand. And, ask your spouse to give you some grace and leeway. We'll talk about that in a second. To be able to receive it and to express it or to explain it further so that you can understand it. Does that help? Any thought? You can ask some more questions as I move on. What number 5 also means is showing respect for my spouse, even if I don't value what is being said. If it's important to your spouse, at some level it's important to you, or it should be. Because it's not so much what's being said, but the fact of the matter that your spouse, your husband or wife, is of value to you. And this is one of the things that happens, that when you don't listen and you're not attentive and you interject constantly and you want to talk before the other person is talking, what that's saying is I don't respect what you're saying, or I don't value you enough to let you talk, or I don't value you enough to hear you through. So that means then exercise patience in order to be considerate. You have to learn patience. If you're a bottom line kind of guy, just wait. Be patient. because the relationship is far more important than whatever else you think you need to do at the time. Now, some of the opposite things that happen is talking too much. And it's interesting that the Bible addresses this in a number of places, such as in the book of Job, with Job and his so-called friends, or Ecclesiastes. Just talk. There are people who just love to hear themselves talk. There are also people who talk out loud. That's how they process. And I get that. They'll say something and it's as if you're not really there, but that's what they're thinking, and they are just kind of exposing their thoughts at the time. All right, that's all right, I suppose. But don't talk too much. And don't jump ahead. If your partner is talking and you're pretty convinced about what they're going to say, have you had this happen, or do you do this? They're saying something and then you finish their sentence for them. Don't do that. Not only is that rude, but many times it's impolite. It shows you're impatient, and it really isn't encouraging them to talk through with you. Or you cut off your spouse when he or she is not finished. He's talking to you, and you have something to say, and he's in mid-sentence, and you just start talking. And it doesn't matter if it's on the same plane or if it's something totally irrelevant. The fact of the matter is you cut him off. You're done. You don't want to hear anymore. You're finished. Don't do that either. That's not a good thing to do. Or walk away before the conversation is over. Now, that's not to say you can't walk away. What you don't want to do is, you don't want to just walk away angrily. You can just say, I'm upset right now, or I'm angry right now, or I can't discuss this anymore at the moment. We will come back. And then you can walk away and make sure they understand that. So what do you do? Well, obviously, don't interrupt. Don't interrupt, okay? That means if you interrupt, you're more concerned about making your point than hearing what needs to be said. And, I hate to break this to you, and I had to learn it the hard way myself. But my points and my value and views and my perspectives aren't always the greatest. And they're not always the best or the right. So don't interrupt, and don't be disrespectful, and don't show a lack of respect. Know when to be silent and when to speak. Know when to be silent and when to speak. A good dialogue is like a dance. It comes and goes, it's in and out. You increase your volume, decrease the volume. You whisper, you yell, or whatever. There's that dance. It just comes and goes. The ebbs and flow of a dialogue, and that's rather natural and normal. And that's okay. And you want that. But if you're having a hard time knowing when to stop and start, or who should talk and who shouldn't, or who should go next, this is something you may have heard of. Take a soft, not a softball, and take a sponge or a soft kind of ball and give it to your spouse. And your spouse, as long as he or she has the ball, he talks or she talks. And when she is done, her cue to let you talk is to give you the ball. And when you're done, you give it back. And you keep doing that until you get into the habit of learning how to watch the cues and observe each other's pattern of talking so as to not to cut off each other and to be able to listen as needed. And if you're unclear whether or not your spouse is finished, ask. Don't say, are you finished yet? Are you done yet? Can we go now? Just say, may I speak? Or are you done what you're thinking about? Or do you have more to say? And if they want to let you in, then go in and start talking. But you need to give each other room and latitude and the opportunity to convey what you need to convey and talk with one another. Yeah.
Are you done yet, Tom?
Am I done yet? Am I done yet? Oh, is it time? What time is it? Okay, 35 minutes. All right. Number 6, I try to understand the other person's viewpoint. I try to understand the other person's viewpoint. That's important. Proverbs 18 verse 2 says, a fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing his opinion. Proverbs 18:15. An intelligent heart acquires knowledge, and the ear of the wise seeks knowledge. And what does this mean? It means that I make a priority to study and to know my spouse. Have you ever thought of that? Yeah. Your spouse is one that needs to be observed and thought about and studied, because there is a whole history behind him or her that you probably don't know about, even if he or she has told you about some of it. Do you know, have you come to the point in your relationship where you naturally know what's going to be said, and you pick up, and you have this engaging discussion or relationship, and have that? Are you? Mark Wells. Hey, Mark. Cool. It's good to see you, bud. Well, kind of see you. Anyway. So I try to understand the other person's viewpoint. It means, again, study, make it a priority to know your husband or your wife. Get to know them. Don't have a relationship that's always surface. Go deeper. Get into their minds. Know their hearts. Know their pains and frustrations and the depths of their lives. Know their dreams and vision and desires and hopes. And be able to articulate that and speak back those kinds of things to your spouse so that they know that you get it, that they really felt. And make allowance for differences. I've been with couples who appear to assume that, they'll say things like, I don't understand the guy will say, I don't understand my wife. She's so different. Well, like, duh. If she was just like you, then you'd be redundant. There'd be no point in marrying. We complement each other. We come together in a relationship as God tells us to, in a relationship so that the two become one. They leave, they weave, they cleave, and they do so that they are one person, even though, we are two people. And we come in a way that we allow for the differences. And that's okay. It's okay to have those differences. My wife is a consummate musician. She's excellent. In fact, I'm recording down here in her studio. She teaches music. She plays music. She's a violinist, has her degrees in music and all that. I don't get it. I appreciate some of her classical choices that she has, but I really don't understand, and my heart is not in it. But my heart is in her, and I understand her to that degree. So research your husband or your wife and get to know them better. And then understanding the other person's viewpoint. Doing the opposite is when your partner is talking, you react or draw improper conclusions. This happened to Job quite a bit if you read through Job again. They were so bad at understanding Job and what he was going through that he ultimately said in Job 13, "Oh, that you would only keep silent. That would be your wisdom." In other words, shut up, because you're not helping. But we don't want to be like Job's friends. We don't want to be lazy either and not do the work of knowing who our spouse is, who the wife is, and who the husband is. In fact, in 1 Peter, the exhortation to Christian men is to live with their wives in an understanding way, meaning to be knowledgeable about them. Hey, Joe. Oh, hi, Debbie. You're on too. And who, Melissa? Good. I kind of feel like that old Romper Room. This is before some of your time, but Romper Room, I think it was. She had this magic glass, and she could apparently see people, these little kids, as they're watching. That's an aside. That's free of charge. All right, so what to do? And we'll almost close with this. What to do? How to understand the other person's perspective. Here's another acronym. And I like acronyms because they help to hang ideas on. So the acronym is GRASP. Grasp what your spouse is saying. Grasp who your spouse is. And the first one is give grace. Give grace. Come on, lighten up. Give grace. Show grace. Be gracious. If they mumble and stumble and, don't communicate well, give grace. If they're upset, show grace. If they're happy and you're sad, well, give grace. In all situations, be gracious with your spouse. Then R, repeat back what you hear them say. I hear what you say. This is what I think you said, or this is what I heard you say. Sometimes I say, yeah, that's it. Sometimes I say, no, that's not it at all. So you have to pursue that. But repeat back what you hear them say. A is ask genuine questions in order to clarify what's said. Ask genuine questions to clarify what's said. Be an investigator. Ask the questions. Do you mean this or do you mean that? Do you intend to say this when you said that? Explain yourself further because I don't get it. And that's legitimate. That's okay. S is for sympathize. Now this is important. And something that often escapes us is because there's a tendency in the Christian world to think that we all need to be like Dr. Spock on that old Star Trek show, where he was all logic and no emotion. Well, the reality is we can't be people, we can't live without emotion. Emotion helps in so many ways. But what we do when we sympathize is to validate your partner's emotion. If they're happy, that's good. Be happy. If they're sad about something and you're not, then you can say, I see that you're sad. Can you tell me about that? Don't invalidate. Don't be rude or a jerk, if you will, and say, stop feeling that way. Don't think that way. Or, you can't feel that. Validate their emotions. Sympathize with them. And if at all possible, empathize. And then the last one, P, of grasp, is paraphrase the response to make sure you heard it right. Paraphrase what they said. Paraphrase, okay? So grasp. Give grace, repeat back, ask genuine questions, sympathize, and paraphrase. And finally, we're at the last point. Is that okay, George? I'm glad George is here to help us and keep us on track. So, Hey, Connie. Yo, everybody. Connie, welcome, Connie. Connie is an awesome poet, and he is, I would say, a poet activist who has concern for, is a wonderful Christian guy who has great concern for those who are in need, or who are desperate, who are impoverished, or who are abused. Good to have you here. The last thing is, in these important discussions, number 7, in the important discussions, stay on topic and answer appropriately. Just stay on topic. If you come to the table, so to speak, or you're sitting on the couch and you have all these things you want to talk about, it's going to be very hard to say, I need to talk about these 33 and a half things when your spouse is only wanting to discuss one. And if it comes to that, write them down, put them on the refrigerator, or send an email, put it in on your iPad, and a reminder what to do, what to talk about. So don't try to cover everything at once. But the 7th thing is, during important discussions, stay on topic. Stay on topic. Keep coming back. Don't, if you start chasing the proverbial rabbit, let the rabbit go and come back and talk. As Proverbs 15:23 says, Proverbs 15:23, to make an apt answer is a joy to a man, and a word in season, how good that is. So in important discussions, stay on topic. All right, that's a wrap for those things. Here's the question. How'd you score? How'd you do? How'd you do? You don't have to share it. You don't need to. Like I said, I'll have these notes in relevate.org under communication blog. I'll post them in the next couple of days if you want the full notes. Otherwise, feel free to go back on the unit section in Titus 2 Communities marriage support group, and you can review this session and all the other sessions that have been presented, or you can go to YouTube on the Espresso channel. So here it is. You ready for this? Here's the grades, the rubric, the grade. If you got a 7, you need help. And if that's the case, give Pastor Tay a call, okay? If you're about 21, the score's around 21, that's not bad. You know, that's good for some things, but you need improvement. However, if you're 35, that's fantastic. I wish I had a gift prize to give you, but 35 is maximum score, and what that means is you're a great listener. And maybe you can present a thing on listening the next time. Any other thoughts or questions? Check out titus2ministry.org. And how'd you score? Huh? Hey, John. Tom Melconian's on as well. Okay. Well, join us next week in Titus 2 Community. Talk Live Tuesday, same time. And I'll be here again. I'll be doing other things between now and then, but I'll come back here. And I hope you will too. Because what we'll talk about next week is conflict. So what you need to do is talk to your spouse in some way that will cause conflict, and then we'll come back and we'll resolve it and fix it. How's that? Huh? Who else? Oh, Kimberly Rivers. Hey, got all these wonderful people showing up. So join us next week, 6 p.m. Pacific time, 9 p.m. Eastern time, when we discuss conflict. We resolve how to deal with conflict. If you missed, like I said, any part of tonight's show, you can go into the Units tab, or you can go. All right. I believe that's it. I'm going to sign off for now. I love you guys. It's great seeing so many of my friends on. I get to see, I wish I could see you in person. So we'll be in touch. Take care. God bless.
Thanks for joining us for a devotional drink today. If you love Espresso, click here to subscribe so you know when the next one is ready to enjoy. Visit our website for resources for every chapter of your life. And if you're thirsty for more, click here. See you next time. May God bless your day.